when you become a traditional Catholic, or you really start to look for the first time in your life earnestly at what is happening in the church, you get so unsettled because you realize there's just so many treasures that have been lost. And so my example again is this: the last year I went to Beacon, and I'm happy that I went, particularly that first year. I think it's good to be with young Catholics praising Christ. We had, there was Eucharistic procession. It was, but for adoration, the first year it was quiet and it was reverent, and that's exactly how adoration should be. Like, here is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord right in front of you, and for an hour you are undivided. But the second year they brought in like the worst genre, right, which is like the Christian light rock vamp band.
Yeah, who was that? It was like
Well, I
it
don't
was
want.
like a really big deal. I
Oh
can't
yeah,
remember who
yeah.
it is, but
I mean, and it all sounds the same, but worse yet, it's like what
right.
it does is it takes adoration where we are united with our head and our heart and our soul, and it just makes it emotional schlock. And if you
Yeah.
don't feel like you have the Spirit within you, right? It's a problem with like some parts of evangelical Protestantism or Pentecostalism, right? Like, there has to be an emotional reaction, otherwise you just don't have it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't pray, and that's what really made me mad. Is I know that
Mhm.
there are people who do praise and worship, and they surrender themselves to Jesus, and they or charismatic Catholics, and they'll be like, no, dude, like that's how I pray, like whatever. And all prayer
Not
is
a
is
fan.
good and fulfilling, but in terms of how the church should structure the seriousness of what is happening, the spiritual reality, we don't. We should have music, obviously, that
Mhm.
reverences God in the highest kind of sensibility, that really gives the best to him, and music that it's like, look, like I don't listen to chant just like willy-nilly. I'll do some polyphony, but
Mhm.
there's a reason why this is becoming more attractive to younger Catholics. And it's because for the
Well, and
first
I
time that they
think
can pray.
yeah, and I think they did a really good job initially, because what they did was they brought in some of the old that a lot of people weren't
Yeah.
accustomed to
Yeah.
or had ever seen before. So there was a lot of Latin that they included
Mm-hmm.
um, in the mass. It was still Novus Ordo, but they included some hymns in
Completely true.
Latin,
Yeah.
and obviously during adoration. And then we also did the procession,
Yeah.
and we did a litany of the saints while we were doing all that, and it was all
Mm-hmm.
very externally and internally traditional,
Yep.
and I really like that. And then I think they were onto something. I think they understood that that was interesting to the people,
Yeah.
the youngsters that were coming out, and for some reason they just thought that it's just good enough for one night, like,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not common. If you go to other churches, Novus Ordo churches, this isn't a common thing
No.
to include Latin, to do any of the traditional prayers, to
Well, you know what it is?
that sort
It's
of thing.
almost like Charles Clum talks about how like there was like the one liturgical parish back in the day, and the other ones
Mhm.
weren't up to snuff. But it's like they've, instead of saying we need to get the other parishes up to snuff, it's like we roll out the Ursus Antiqui, when we roll out the ancient solemnity of Catholicism, and then we go, haha, but good thing that's just grandpa's on the shelf again. and and yeah, and so again, they wonder like why so many young people are turning to tradition, why, and in higher fidelity and higher birth rates and higher everything. And we're like, look, the ancient stuff worked for 2,000 years because it brings us to Christ in such a radical way. Not saying that you can't
Yeah.
get through Christ again through just praise and worship or something, but there are a lot of charismatic Catholics that realize that there is an upkeep that you have to do in the charism, right? And I think that there's a better shelf just because of the weight of history that you can rest in tradition.